So A Plague Tale is now at 60 FPS. Digital Foundry did a review of another performance test on it, and they talked a little bit about it. And we're going to go through it in this video because it kind of lined up with a lot of things I've been saying in my other videos, which I already kind of had a sense because on working with Unreal Engine, I remember building this very intricate project where I was just throwing a whole bunch of stuff and just building this, environment. And I realized my FPS was dropping heavily. Since then, I kind of knew the amount of assets that you have and their quality are going to influence the performance of your game. And the rats in A Plague Tale was one of the biggest issues that was dropping FPS. In fact, the devs went ahead and locked the game to 30 FPS, and then you could get about 40 FPS on performance mode. Now that they put the FPS at 60, you'll see pretty much in this particular test, just the first 7 minutes, all of the different things that have been changed so far since I've been watching it. Let's go ahead and kind of play it and let's see what's going on.
Your wish has been granted. A Plague Tale Requiem released on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S in late 2022. Requiem was and is a true next-generation project with a huge leap in visual quality over the original game, 2019's A Plague Tale Innocence. A game that pushes developer Asobo Studios' in-house engine with vastly high-quality materials, lighting, and scene detail. In fact, the sequel even boosted the number of rats from 5,000 in the original game to a tidal wave of 300,000.
Yeah, so that number of rats that they actually boosted, in my opinion, was something that I thought was going to be CPU intensive. I haven't played the game, too far in. I mean, I was playing Gotham Knights at the time, but I was laughing going, man, that's crazy insane. But they planned on locking the game at 30 FPS on the new consoles, so it already did not necessarily make too much of a, difference. Now that I'm looking back in retrospect, let's keep watching though.
So Requiem is an incredible, gorgeous game, a real showcase for newer consoles, but for many people, the discourse online was sidetracked. Sidetracked by the fact it ran at just 30 frames per second on PS5 and Series X, or at 40 FPS if you happen to run the game with a 120Hz display connected. Still, it's 30 FPS for a majority of people, and crucially, a step back from the original game's 60 FPS performance when played on these consoles.
Well, that game's performance being played on these consoles, they made I don't know how they went about, moving A Plague Tale Innocence to 60 FPS after the new generation of consoles came out. Perhaps they just unlocked the frame rates, and because, at that time, the way they had actually gone ahead to kind of optimize it for 30 FPS, they could easily do it, or they went ahead and maybe made some tweaks to ensure that they could get the game running at 60 FPS. I don't know. We don't know how they went about that.
Enter patch 1.5 then, and Asobo Studio finally has a response. This new update adds a 60 frames per second performance mode next to the existing 30 frames per second resolution mode, and it genuinely works. At last, the game's action, its combat, the camera control, all flow at a silky smooth 60 FPS. On both PS5 and Series X, I've barely spotted a single drop under 60 on this new performance mode, though as an aside, Xbox Series S sadly receives no upgrade here whatsoever, and that version sticks to 30 FPS as usual.
It makes sense. The machine's capabilities is not able to, play this particular game at more than 30 FPS. Now, some people may say, well, it's the Series S, is this console even strong enough? Remember that Ghost Recon Breakpoint can actually play on the Series S at 60 FPS. So not every game is going to be able to leverage 60 FPS on every machine, regardless of how you go ahead and redesign it. I believe, though, that they could make a 60 FPS Plague Tale for the Series S, but that's basically going to require going ahead and redesigning the entirety of the game itself. But again, that aside, let's just keep watching.
But there is a catch here for the two premium consoles as well. There is a trade-off. The clue to just how 60 FPS is achieved is in Asobo's patch notes.
So in their patch notes, they basically are telling you how they achieve the 60 FPS, right? This is really cool.
Where on PC, there are new options as of patch 1.5. Crucially, players are now able to adjust the refresh rate for rats and NPCs, as well as reduce the number of rats on screen.
This is common practice. There's a game called Dirt. I think Dirt Racing or so. I remember there's a video where Gamers Nexus, where they made a comparison with the PS5 and some old computers from back in the day. Let's look Gamers Nexus PS5 versus PC. This video is a very popular one. You really need to go, if you want to watch it and see, you should, I think you should take some time to go ahead and look at this video. Let this ad play. But they did some comparisons in 120 FPS, modes of some games. Man, 2 ads, YouTube, y'all are hungry? Get the heck out of here. And they looked and saw that, even old machines, when it comes to just raw performance, they actually could do better than the PlayStation 5. Now, when it came to things like ray tracing, those, devices like those GPUs did not necessarily have it. So in their, comparisons of their racing, what they did for the PlayStation 5 and the PC version to kind of compare things was they looked at the PlayStation 5's quality and saw that they had reduced the crowd quality compared to the PC version. So this crowd quality, because they were doing settings to kind of see what would match. And the hardware that they picked, I mean, you'd be surprised the kind of hardware that they had to pick, because they couldn't really find much that could actually compare in a sense, even with the CPUs and the graphics cards. They didn't even go as high as a 1070. I think they stuck with like the 1060. Let me see, what graphics card did they go? They went with the 1060, which they thought was even, way more powerful in terms of raw performance. But when they went to the Dirt side, they went ahead and had to just basically reduce the number of, the crowd and all that stuff. So this is pretty much what, game developers will do. If you're running the game at, as like say an unlocked frame rate on PC, you give the option to, tweak density of foliage and density of, crowds and NPCs and stuff. Whereas on the console, you find the one that best works for the entire gameplay, and you just lock it there and reduce a lot of the options. Consoles don't usually get too many options when it comes to scaling, unless they're just giving you less options to choose from, in a sense, which doesn't really make any sense. They just, because it's one machine that they're going to make for everybody, just go ahead and lock it anyways, so that everybody can play at the same performance.
All this saves hugely on CPU performance, and yes, to cut to the chase, both PS5 and Series X make use of these low RAT and NPC refresh rate options.
Pretty much. That's how you're going to do it. These machines, they have their limits where they are, so some things are going to give, and some things are going to have to take precedence. Really interesting.
The result being, while we do get 60 FPS gameplay in the performance mode, the catch is the swarm of rats and the characters around towns still update at 30 frames per second.
So basically, that's almost an entire, redesign of key elements within the game, because you have to give and take. If you take the raw form of the game on PC and just drop it on the PS5 and the Series X, it's not going to get the job done, because even on PC, this game really tasked, really high-end PCs when it came out. It was a very tasking game. And them locking it at 30 FPS and giving the 45 FPS mode, if you had the the variable refresh rate, was a very smart way for them to go. But I remember at that time people were cussing out Gotham Knights, and this game came out literally a week before Gotham Knights, and people were like, well, but the game looks good. I'm like, the game is just its art direction, that's all. You can make a game that looks like this in any game engine you want. It doesn't really mean anything. Get your lighting, get your really talented environment artists, and tell them this is the vision you have. They'll get the job done.
Here's the most obvious example. Playing Series X in its performance mode, sure enough, we get 60 FPS camera movement. Lovely. We get 60 FPS animations on the torch as Amicia waves it, carving a path through the shadows. But notice how the rats at our feet scurry around at half that rate. It creates an otherworldly effect, a disconnect between the player motion, the camera running at 60 FPS, and then the swarm of rats updating at 30. Honestly, for any scenes where rats dominate the screen space to such an extent, it does beg the question, can the game always truly claim to be running at 60 FPS? The good news is, this doesn't represent all of gameplay.
Can the game truly be claiming to run at 60 FPS? That's a very good question. That's one question that I think we probably need to go ahead and, continue to ask, because, I understand, because some games are running at these high performance rates, and I'm going to stop the video. If you want to watch it, you can go ahead and, find it on Digital Foundry. And, we need to really go into this conversation looking and saying, by now, the new consoles, by the time they came out in 2020, they were already slower than old PC machines. And so getting 60 FPS across the board is something that is going to be not necessarily an easy feat to accomplish, because even on your PC machines, after a few years, when games continue to push the limits, you'll eventually find out that you start getting outdated by just the way games are. It happens. You cannot expect to play 60 FPS on your machine perpetually. Many of us that have been on PC since the PS4 days, or some of you even longer than you've never been on console, basically, you know how many times you've had to make upgrades. And even within the console space, even though the upgrades don't necessarily seem as much, I think now that we're looking at the 60 FPS, the 4K resolution, and so on and so forth, we're about to start seeing very quick refreshes, especially things like the PlayStation 5 Pro, which is being rumored to come out. If that is actually a thing, then it even lends more credence that just a short period after the new consoles have come out, pretty much, think about it. 2020 was when the new consoles came out, and now they're talking about the possibility of a PS5 Pro possibly will be coming with the Spider-Man game. In my opinion, I think that's the best way that Sony's probably going to go ahead and try and market it, or maybe it might come in 2024. However you want to dish it, though, it's a much more, in my opinion, it will be much more advanced and much more powerful than the regular PS5. And possibly will be able to give a little bit more in terms of performance to developers. But expect to see this over and over again if you want to be getting the performance that you want. We kind of knew this in the PS4 versus PS4 Pro days, but I think maybe we forgot real quick. But I'm glad that the developers were able to kind of, tweak their game and make it run at 60 FPS. But not every game is going to be able to make these sacrifices. Sometimes a game is just more intricate. And I understand somebody tweeted this particular news to me on my other Twitter and said, there's no excuse for Gotham Knights. And I laughed and said, well, they're not the same game. A Plague Tale is even a slow moving game in the way that the game is designed, its animations and so on and so forth. And if you actually think about it, Gotham Knights is a much more faster game. So its animations and everything having to run at 60 FPS is not going to be the same as a Plague Tale animations running at 60 FPS in terms of performance and what each machine can carry. So this is why Gotham Knights actually does 60 FPS on really high-end machines, and this is on the PC side, and anything that's on the mid-range would sometimes have to struggle. They'll be sitting at 50 FPS or so, but when you want to do 60 FPS, you really have to have a mid-tier machine all the way up. Just the way the devs designed the game. If they want to make a 60 FPS version for the consoles or for lower tier machines, they're going to have to make a lot of changes and a lot of sacrifices. But I'm glad this actually came to light. I'm glad that we got to talk a little bit about it. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Peace out.